The talk today, I'll really be in three parts. Kind of explanation of where I'm coming from, kind of background of the work, and then an explanation of a project called Open Frameworks, which is a toolkit for making work, and then really kind of recent collaborations, including the last project I'm going to show, which is really kind of very dear to my heart. I always start the talks by showing this picture. So I used to look like this, and now I look like this. So it's really, when I show my work, it's about how I have come to lose my hair. Because my background is in fine arts, and this is what I look like. I was studying painting and printmaking. And in a way, it was accidental that I wound up using computers. And then I've started to lose my hair, and then I think every new project I lose more hair. So I travel a lot, and one of the things that happens when you travel is that they ask you what your occupation is. So you come to a new country, you fill out a form, and they ask you, what do you do for a living? And I never feel comfortable to say that I'm an artist. It always feels sort of uncomfortable. And what I want to say is that I'm a researcher. Because I really believe artistic practice is a form of research. That when you're making art, it's a kind of, it is a research. It's like an R&D. A company would have a research and development department. And that art is a kind of research and development for humanity. That when we're making art, we're doing R&D, but for humanity. I write software. So this is what it looks like in the work that I make. But I like to think about software and technology similar to breathing. So in the works that I show you, you're not conscious of the fact that you're breathing. You're just, you are, well now you are, but you're not conscious of the fact that you're breathing. And in the works that I show you, I don't want it to be, when I make them, I don't want it to be consciously about the fact that they're made with technology. The kind of research that I'm involved with, I think you'll get a sense of it. But it's really about creating magical experiences, trying to make invisible things visible, trying to bring bring magic and wonder to the world. So we do all kinds of things, and I'll show you different projects, but we do installations, we do performances. And so, for example, this is the project that Tina was referring to that was in the Technorama Museum called the Manual Input Sessions that I make together with my partner, Roland Levin, which is a combination of an analog, a overhead projector, and a digital projector combining to make a kind of hybrid light source. We always try to make these sort of absurd and really kind of weird things. I'm going to walk you through one project because it's really, through this project, it's very clear to kind of see the research and interest and involvement. So this project is called Drawn. And this project really began as a performance where the idea is that I'd be on stage painting and the audience would see what I was painting. So I would be here on stage working with a musician painting. And again, my background's fine arts, I love painting, and I just wanted to just love this idea of making a performance with ink. And then projected would be a kind of supposedly live view, or it is live, but I would write software that would kind of work in the middle between what I did and what the audience sees. And it was inspired by the work of Thomas Edison and John Stuart Blackton. So this is a film, The Enchanted Drawing from 1905, where they used the kind of camera tricks to create the illusion of drawings coming off of the paper. It was also inspired by the work of the Portuguese artist Helena Almeida. And Helena Almeida would do this work where she would take black and white photographs and add blue paint. So here, for example, she paints a blue dot, she picks it up, she eats it, and she cries blue tears. And I love this idea of paint as something you could touch. Here, she paints something, she puts it in her pocket. So I wanted to make something which was really about touching paint. And so this performance really began as this kind of thing where I would be on stage painting and the audience would see what I was painting. and then I would be able to touch and move and so on. So,
続いてご紹介するのはザッカリーさんの作品ドローン。ザッカリーさん、白い紙に何やら書いていますが、あらら、動き始めましたよ。
So the general idea is that I would be, I would paint something and then I'm able to touch what I
作品
painted.
ドローンは紙に描いた模様がまるで命を吹き込まれたかのように突然動き出す、まさに手品のような作品です。
And a very curious thing happened. So we were on tour in Japan. We were making these performances, and after every show, the audience would just come up and they would want to see how it was made. Because in some way, it's like a magic trick, right? I'm on stage, I'm painting, and then this kind of weird stuff happens. And so I decided to make a version for people to try themselves. And a lot of times in the work that I do, I go back and forth between performance and installation. So in performance, where you have a structure of time, you could take somebody on a journey, and an installation which is more democratic. So create this installation for people to try themselves. It's kind of a self-contained version where you can come and paint and then touch what you painted. And there's something that I noticed when I watch people interact with this project. So I was watching people set it up, watch people use it, and it's this thing that I noticed, which I started to call the open mouth phenomenon. I got really interested or excited about the idea of the open mouth. And so I want you to pay attention. This is a festival for children in Amsterdam called Cinekid, where we set it up. So I want you to pay attention to this girl. So this is number 1. Number 2, you can kind of see the finger entering the scene. Number 3 and number 4. This idea is that it's creating an open mouth, and I think as an aesthetic strategy, an open mouth is a pathway to somebody's heart. That when you can open somebody's mouth, you can, that's an entryway. So, as a result of making these art projects, we've been working for a while now. So me and my partners have been making these art projects, and as a result of it, a side project that has come out called Open Frameworks, which is essentially a toolkit, an open source toolkit based on the software that we write. So it's this kind of toolkit, an open source framework in C++. We think about it, it's almost like this kind of building blocks of code, where we take the things that we learn and we make these building blocks for people to make stuff with. So it's a kind of C++ for non-nerds, C++ for artists, and it's really use-driven. It comes out of our experience of making stuff. Okay, these are more technical details. The basic idea is it makes your life a lot easier to do stuff in code. And I work on it together with my partner Theo Watson, who's just an amazing artist. And Theo, a really good example of a project with open frameworks that just is really exciting. This is a project called Laser Tag that Theo made together with the Graffiti Research Lab, which combines a camera, a projector, a laser, and software in order to allow you to draw on a building. So it's essentially a kind of toolkit where you could come to any building, set up this projector and the laser and the camera, and then this software will track the laser and allow you to draw on the building. And the exciting thing about open source and about building these tools is seeing all of the kind of weird and crazy stuff that people do. So every morning I wake up, I go to Vimeo, I go to YouTube, and I check out the new projects that people have made with open frameworks. And people make beautiful stuff. So for example, this is a project from Chris Zachary where there are bugs on a screen, and you put your hand next to the screen, and the bugs actually come off the screen onto your hand. And I'm always talking about making artwork which is leaving the screen. And I can't think of a better metaphor to describe leaving the screen than objects that actually come off the screen. This is a Spanish collective called La La Lab. They made a project in a workshop which switches your face with somebody else's face. And I was helping them, we were coding it, and I was helping them get it to work, and it switched my nose and somebody else's nose, and it's totally frightening. Like, it's super scary. But that's the exciting thing about this kind of toolkits, is that the works that people made. Or Chris O'Shea made a project for the London Design Museum called Out of Bounds, which uses an infrared torch, which essentially allows you to see through the wall into the out of bounds area. So it's a kind of a flashlight that lets you see through the wall. And we've been doing all kinds of things at a place called I-Beam, where I've been an artist kind of researcher in residence. We've been doing workshops, and this is like probably my favorite project that was made at I-Beam. This is an ink called an ink scanner, where you wear white clothing and your body is descended into black ink. And by taking sequential photographs, you can build a kind of, it's a very ghetto 3D scanner. So this is like
very short amount. It took me only like a day to make this.
So here it's like I don't know what's going on. So here's like you descend into black liquid, and then it builds a 3D model of your body out of that. So that's the exciting thing, is seeing. Now we have it running on the iPhone. I think Theo made my favorite iPhone thing. Here, this is like, this blew me away.
Reality record player. Check it out.
This is a vinyl, but you have to spin the phone. So the question comes up, like, why are you invested in open source? What's interesting or important to you about open source? And I think it's a very simple answer for me, which is that when you tell somebody that you're making art, the idea or notion they'll have, or if I tell my grandmother that I'm making art, she has this notion of art as a kind of Vincent van Gogh. So you're this solitary genius who's misunderstood, that you're working alone in your attic, and you're fighting against society. And I think we really need to fight against this notion of art. I think I would really preach this idea that art making, we need to think about it more like a laboratory, that we are performing research and working together. And so there's been a big push in recent times about kind of DIY culture. If you think about things like Make Magazine, Instructables, this whole kind of culture of do-it-yourself that we can, this sort of movement. And I'm a big advocate for a movement, this thing called DIWO, do it with others. And I think for me, this is like the new DIY. This is the next step, the next level. And so we've been doing it in all kinds of ways. We do workshops, we do this kind of crazy 2-week workshop where people hang out and make projects that are exhibited at the end. So here, this was at I-Beam. We did it in Mexico. And we do workshops and so on, which are just like, it's crazy fun, where we come together and it's really about sharing and learning. We even created a laboratory. We made this laboratory out of scaffolding. This is like a 3-story laboratory that we made at Ars Electronica. We worked with this great artist, Tyen Choi, who did all the visuals, and then we made this crazy laboratory. I'll explain this because it's just like such a fun project, but then I gotta go into like hyperdrive to get through all the projects. Here, this is a 3-story laboratory. On the first floor is a kind of exhibition area, and the audience would tell us what to work on. So they would come in, this is for a festival, and they would write down their idea on this board. They would choose 5 words. And then actually, there was a sort of, here. You can kind of see here, there's a sort of hole in the floor there. You see at the top? And then the idea would be printed out, and they would put the idea through the hole in the floor. And then there was here are security cameras, so they see all of us working on their projects. And then here's an exhibition. And then upstairs, we created this laboratory where we got 15 people to hang out making projects. And so we were just being like mega nerds for 5 days. And here you can actually see the hole in the floor where the ideas would come up. So somebody would sleep, usually someone would sleep here, and then they would get an idea and then have to wake up and then start coding and make projects. This kind of thing is just really fun when you can get people together, when you can bring people together. We even wore these white lab coats, so we took the idea of researcher like really seriously. So, okay, I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna jump to the last project because I think I'm running out of time, right? How much time do I have?
It's so fascinating, I don't care.
You don't care? Is everybody okay? Okay, then I'll slow the pace. All right. I was just in this talk I was at PopTech last week in Maine, and they were like 10 minutes exactly, and there was this big red clock, and I was like in the cafe, like I did it like 5 times to make sure I was 10 minutes. I was like 10 minutes and 22 seconds. I was so excited, and I got up there, and they put on 8 minutes. But I think it was just to make me like scared or something. But I was like, oh my god. Anyway. So I'll talk really. So as a result of this Open Frameworks project, we've just been meeting more and more people. So again, it's this kind of DIWO culture where through workshops, through events, the community is getting bigger and bigger of people that are making stuff together. And the plus side about that is that we work on kind of crazier and crazier projects, and that for me has been really interesting. So I want to show you 3 projects that are really a result of this kind of Open Frameworks thing. The first project I want to talk about is a project that we did this summer, which is called IQ Fund. And this came out because I was in Brussels and I was doing a workshop, an Open Frameworks workshop, and I met an advertising company there, and they represent Toyota, and they wanted to make something with the Toyota IQ, which is this kind of small, smart car. And the idea that they had, and it was really a collaboration between them and these typographers and myself, the idea that they had was to make a typeface with the car. And so we set up in a hangar in Brussels, and we mounted a camera and we tracked the car from above. And we made a typeface with the car. So I wrote software. The idea was that we have the camera mounted up high, and then I wrote software that tracks the car, and then outputs the path that the car is driven.
Tourner autour des côtes, aller jusqu'au dernier.
And the stunt driver was crazy. He was so happy. He was doing like letters backwards. He did a G completely backwards. He was just showing off that day. Here you can see like there's this. He always does these wipeouts. Yeah, that G is totally backwards. That's just showing off. And then these great designers, these typographers, took the data that we produced and made this typeface. But this is an example of like through Open Frameworks, we've been meeting interesting people and developing these kind of collaborations really quickly. And another project that for me is just an example of the power of groups coming together is this project called Lights On. And this is in Linz. This is the Ars Electronica, which is an electronic arts festival, the kind of big electronic arts festival in Europe. And they have a museum, and they extended the museum out along the Danube last year, because Linz was the cultural capital of the EU. So they spent money on, they spent a lot of money on extending the building out. And And when they built the new building, they put LEDs in the facade. So all of the windows, they put a kind of strip of lights into the window. And they asked me to make something with the lights, and I said, I can do it, but I can do it if I can bring a crew, you know, that we really need to get a group together. And they said, sure. So we brought in Davian Stewart, who's comes from New Zealand. He's a hacker. He worked on a software, you know, RJDJ. Do people know that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he's one of the developers of RJDJ. Joel Gethin-Lewis, who's comes from London. He's used to be at a company called United Visual Artists. Do you know that? And Daito Manabe comes from Tokyo. Daito, you might know this YouTube video of this face being electrocuted to music. Do you know that? Yeah, so that's Daito. So the four of us sort of hung out in a room. Actually, we were in this room across the river from the building. And it was a little bit like we were terrorists, because we were in this empty building with a really good view, and all this equipment. Sort of like hanging out, writing software and composing music. And what we were doing was building a performance for the building. So we were doing an audio-visual performance where, you know, Daito was composing music and we were composing visuals for really kind of bringing the building to life. And so we mounted speakers, and then all of the windows light up. Is about 10 minutes long, so I'll kind of jump ahead. There's some crazy stuff. Some really like. And it was exciting for us. Always these projects are really nice because you work on them at night. You only can work, you know, obviously you can only see the LEDs at night, and then the later it gets, the more drunk people get. So we would be testing, so like you start testing at midnight, and then it's like people, but then by like 3 or 4 a.m. people are, you know, like they're pretty loaded, and then they will just like, they'll be so amazed. So it's really exciting. And then the other thing that was just fascinating about the project is that it looks like really high tech, but it was actually so old school. Like we would have these problems where we would be across the river, we'd have to run across the river, you know, run up to the top of the building and actually power cycle the lights. There were circuit breakers. It was like super old school. Okay, so the last project, and this is a project which for me is very dear to my heart, and we're just in the middle of, and it's a project that I just really I'm excited to talk about. It's this project called iWriter. And this is a collaboration. So it's a collaboration between myself and Chris Zachary, who's the artist who made the bugs that come off the screen onto your hand, and Theo. Theo and I work on open frameworks together. And then also with the Graffiti Research Lab, so Evan Roth and James Potterly. So it's really the five of us, and then a company in LA called the Evelyn Group that sort of brought us all together. And with this guy named Tony Kwan. And Tony Kwan is a graffiti artist in LA. His graffiti name is Tempt. He's an old school legend in LA. And 7 years ago, Tony was diagnosed with ALS. So he was walking down the street and he fell over, and they diagnosed him with Lou Gehrig's disease. And if you don't know about ALS, it's a disease which attacks your muscles, and so you start to lose muscle control. So there was a time when he fell over, and then there was a time when he could still draw, but with one hand holding the other hand. And now he has advanced stage ALS. So he's in the hospital. He's on a ventilator. So the first thing that we did is we met with him. We kind of showed him what we did, and we were just thinking about how can we take the skills that we have and work with Tony. So this is actually this is a video. This is Tony's father kind of describing.
Tim one is there because he suffers from Lou Gehrig's disease, and he's in an advanced stage of Lou Gehrig's disease, otherwise referred to as ALS. He is not able to move his limbs, or eat, or talk, or move any part of the body. And so, but however, his brain is wide awake and he's just full of ideas and full of creativity.
Oh, I'm out of power. Oh, shit. Sorry. Oh, yikes. Sorry.
Or is a special unit you guys have introduced.
And what we've been doing, so after meeting him, what we've been doing is developing kind of low-cost systems for eye tracking, because the only way he can communicate with his eye. And then also he has a commercial eye tracker, so we've been developing software for that as well, and going back and forth between kind of a low-cost system. These commercial systems cost about $15,000, and so we've been developing a $50 system. So it's pretty ghetto, but it's a kind of $50 eye tracker that you can put together, you can build yourself, and then and so we've been going back and forth between this kind of commercial system and this homemade system. And so the homemade system, we have all of the instructions, we have it on Instructables, you can build it yourself, and it's a very kind of cheap eye tracking system. Here's Tony actually drawing with our system. And so what we've been developing, in some way it's kind of like an illustrator, like this very strange sort of illustrator, but for paralyzed graffiti artists. Where you can draw, you can fill in, you can do shadows, you can change the stroke, and so on. And as soon as we got this to work, so as soon as we had a system where Tony could draw, we were thinking, what is the next step? And the next step was to take what he was drawing and project it. So we went out on the streets and we're projecting what he was drawing. Here you can actually see the software in action. So here he's writing his name, an M, and a P, and a T.
Just last night you were out in downtown Los Angeles, dark corners of downtown Los Angeles. And as I stood there in some dark corner, fearing for my life, no.
So we would do this thing where Tony was drawing, and then we would project what Tony was drawing. So he was in his hospital room, drawing graffiti, and then we were out on the street projecting what he was drawing.
Miles away, it will be projected onto the wall of the building.
So here,
Guess if I was simple in the mind, everything would be fine. Maybe if I wasn't turned to girls, instead of being nice and speaking kind words, then maybe it would be okay to say then I wasn't a good guy to begin with. But my mind is all crazy. They got me thinking I ain't human like I came from above.
and so so we've been doing this, and what's exciting is that now with this system, Tony continues to draw. So he's drawing, he's making these like amazing drawings. He's been hacking the software, so he's doing like really intense stuff with the software now. And we've even done things where, for example, he'll draw. This was in a show in Norway where he made a drawing, and then graffiti artists in Norway painted what he drew. So he's able, from his hospital room in LA, to have collaborations with artists really around the world. And what he said is that's the first time that I've drawn anything since 2003. It feels like taking a breath after being held underwater for 5 minutes. So I want to end with that. I want to show one last slide, and this is my favorite image of all of the images that I show. This image, the reason I love it so much, this is the drawing project, the first project that I showed you. And the reason that I love this image so much is that these are children that are just kind of watching and waiting and trying to see what's going to happen. And it's very clear to see on their expressions this sense of wonder. And I think that's what we have the power to do with this artwork, to create situations and opportunities for wonder. Thank you very much.
Since you're coming from a fine art background, how did you develop like the technological prowess to do all this, to engineer all this?
It really was, what happened to me is that I fell in with a kind of community of people that were doing Flash and ActionScript, and this happened, it was like a long chain of events, but basically I had to find a job, and at that time everybody was doing web design. This is like 1999, 2000, so I lied my way into a job, and then the economy crashed and I had all this free time. And what I discovered, the thing that caught my passion was animation. The idea that you could animate in code, and I had always loved animation. And the idea that you could write just a line of code, or create a variable, and then increment a variable and something moves, that caught my attention. And then because there was a community of people like Joshua Davis, Yugo Nakamura, Amit Pataru, Eric Natsky that were writing code, sharing code, and just kind of posting all of the things that they were doing, you could learn. You could take apart and really learn from what other people were doing. And that's how I got into it. So. Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
You said that the last project was your favorite. Is it because it meant so much to another artist to be able to help him? Or what made that your favorite?
Yeah, one of the reasons why it's my favorite is I think, I'm a big advocate of the idea of artistic practice as research, and there's actually real things coming out of this project, like this low-cost eye tracker. While it's still very rough and very ghetto, it's actually like could be really helpful for people. And then in addition, just to see that Tony's now able to draw when he hasn't been, and that it means so much to him and his family, is just really exciting for us. So, yeah.
Where are you getting the funding for some of these projects? Is it always a partnership with an advertising agency or some artist community, or are you self-funded in some respect?
It really depends. So, the project in LA, there was a company that paid for our flights the first time, and then the second time, we asked Parsons for money. Mm-hmm. A lot of times I work with festivals. So Ars Electronica is they funded that research laboratory or that performance we made on the building. And then a lot of times there are projects that are more kind of like that you just do them because you love them, like the Drawn project, which was really kind of out of my pocket, or sometimes we get funding from like a New York State Council on the Arts or some places that support the arts.
Mm-hmm. I think our virtual guest has a question.
Oh yeah.
You're on, Peter.
Yeah, it sounds okay. Like you develop your own toolbox to do your projects. Is that actually like the best thing someone could do, like to learn certain skills? Like, should everyone do his own toolbox, or should everyone go to open frameworks?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think it's for us that making the toolbox, we learned a lot, and not only did we learn a lot, but people have contributed, and then we're all able to make better work. I think if everybody's working on their own tools, then nobody will have time to contribute to anybody else's tools. But I do think working on tools and thinking about the artistic practice in some way, like how how do you publish the results of the things that you do, and take what you learn and take the things that you make along the way and make them reusable are really crucial. So no, I think it's an important part of making art for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
Do you think someday everyone is going to be working in this way, that this will become a new language for mankind, and this will just be how we communicate or how we function?
Wow, that's kind of a tough question. I don't think, I actually think this is one way of working, and there are a lot of ways of working, and a lot of different forms of expression. And this is a form of expression that I think is really important and really meaningful, and I will advocate for it. And especially, in the kind of art world that I'm involved with, there's a lot of criticism about interaction, about this kind of art form. There's a lot of kind of tough criticism, and I will always fight for this. But I don't think that this is that there's any one path. That I think there's a lot of different paths to express oneself and to capture somebody's heart and imagination.
Thank you guys so much.